at you, look at me. Does she talk? Does she come complete? My home, my brother.
The 1980s gave us some of the biggest music legends ever, but not every band made it to glory. Behind the neon lights, wild hair, and screaming guitars, some groups seemed destined for greatness, only to crash and burn spectacularly. Some had one big hit and vanished, while others never even got off the ground. Today, we're diving into 25 famous bands from the 80s that failed miserably. And trust me, their stories are just as wild as their hairstyles. Ready to see who rocked hard but flopped harder? Let's get into it.
Look at you, look at me, the look on every face I see.
Imagine it's the early 1980s in Los Angeles, where neon lights and synth pop ruled the airwaves. Then, out of nowhere, the Dream Syndicate storms in with a sound that was gritty, noisy, and dripping with 60s psychedelia. Their debut, The Days of Wine and Roses, 1982, didn't just turn heads, it became a cult classic. Critics said, "This is the future of rock." So what went wrong? Well, here's the twist. Their follow-up albums, like Medicine Show, missed the mark. The raw chaos fans loved gave way to safer, rootsy sounds. And guess what? Commercial success never showed up. Add in lineup drama, label troubles, and a loss of identity, and the magic just vanished. By 1989, they were gone. If the Dream Syndicate's story felt like a slow unraveling, the next band is more like a flash, bright, explosive, and gone before anyone had time to catch their breath. Now, these guys had the perfect 80s break, literally. Ollie and Jerry scored big with their song "Breakin', There's No Stopping Us" from the cult dance movie Breakin' in 1984. And for a moment, it felt like they were about to ride the hip-hop and dance wave to superstardom. The track hit the US top 10, blasting through radios and roller rinks everywhere. However, their follow-up, Electric Boogaloo, was tied to the sequel movie. Guess what? The sequel flopped, and so did the song. It didn't even scratch the Billboard Hot 100. With no momentum and no real album, Ollie and Jerry disappeared as fast as they appeared. Ever wonder what a band would sound like if every song felt like a lightning bolt? That's the Minutemen. They weren't flashy, they weren't polished, they were raw, fast, and brutally honest. Their tracks rarely stretched past a minute or two, but each one landed like a sucker punch. No fluff, no filler, just straight truth about politics, art, and everyday life. Picture this. 3 guys crammed into a beat-up van, crisscrossing the country, playing sweaty little clubs where the audience was so close you could practically feel their breath. But here's the catch. MTV didn't care, radio didn't care, and the mainstream barely noticed. Why? Because the Minutemen refused to play nice or fit into tidy categories. And yet, here's the twist. While the masses missed them, countless future bands borrowed their honesty, brevity, and bite.
Walking around with your head in the clouds, it makes no sense at all. So you're so short, but you're walking so.
Husker Du blasted out of Minneapolis with hardcore fire and a surprising love for melody. They could scream and then fold into a chorus that stuck in your head. Their songs felt urgent, honest, and often raw, like postcards from a life that was both bruised and brave. They pushed punk's limits by adding melody, depth, and studio risks that confused some fans and thrilled others. Major labels noticed and critics praised them, yet a true commercial payoff in the 80s stayed out of reach. They kept touring hard, writing lots of songs, and testing what punk could become. Over time, their records gained wider praise, and young bands used their mix of noise and tune as a map for what came next. Now, if Husker Du stretched punk into melody, the Wipers dragged it into the shadows.
It's just a mockery. Don't need to waste my time. You know I really tried.
Close your eyes and picture walking down a deserted street at midnight. The streetlights flicker, the wind howls, and every shadow feels alive. That's exactly what the Wipers, a trio from Portland, sounded like. Their music wasn't about shiny hooks or radio-friendly polish. It was raw, jagged, and moody, like a warning whispered in the dark. Greg Sage's guitar didn't just play notes, it carved out stubborn riffs that clung to you long after the song ended. Now, here's the twist. Mainstream America barely noticed. But underground musicians? They were listening closely. Bands like Nirvana and Melvins would later credit the Wipers as a secret blueprint for grunge. And while the Wipers never sold millions, their tapes quietly passed from hand to hand, sparking new fires everywhere they landed. So ask yourself, who really wins, the band on the charts for a season, or the one whose influence refuses to die? What happens when a band decides music shouldn't comfort you, but confront you? That was Big Black. Formed in the early 80s by Steve Albini, they didn't just play songs, they unleashed sonic assaults. Forget traditional drummers. They used pounding drum machines that felt mechanical, almost violent. Guitars? Harsh, jagged, and unforgiving. Lyrics? Blunt as a hammer. Listening to Big Black wasn't easy. It was like standing too close to an electrical storm. And that was the point. Mainstream radio, MTV, they wanted nothing to do with it. But in the underground, Big Black became legendary. Why? Because they proved you could turn pure noise into art without watering it down. Their run was short, ending in 1987, but the legacy stuck. Countless bands borrowed their brutal precision, learning that anger, when shaped with intention, could sound like pure meaning. Big Black turned chaos into control, but the old Next band died by letting chaos run too wild.
I dreamt I was spiritual, and what that means I don't know.
This band was messy in the best way. Loud, funny, and often unpredictable. Their songs moved from rough rock anger to honest, touching tunes that sounded like notes passed in class. Live, they could be brilliant or a wreck, which made each show its own surprise. Critics loved the rawness in those tracks, but radio wanted safer acts and tidy hours, so the band's chaos kept some listeners away. They signed to bigger labels and tried to grow, but the band never fully played by the pop rules. Still, their songs carried real feeling and a loose charm that other bands copied. Over time, they gathered a devoted following who kept their name alive. Today, their records are passed on like secret maps, guiding new players toward honest, ragged music. When Quarterflash hit the scene in 1981 with Harden My Heart, they looked like they were going to be the next big American rock band. The song was a massive success, reaching the Billboard Top 5, and their saxophone-driven sound stood out in a crowded field of new wave acts. But here's the problem. Follow-up singles like Find Another Fool didn't have the same magic. By the time their second album rolled out, momentum had already slipped away. Radio stations stopped playing their new material, fans lost interest, and Columbia Records eventually dropped them. Despite starting with a bang, they fizzled fast. Today, Harden My Heart still pops up on 80s playlists, but the band behind it has long been forgotten by most.
Does she walk? Does she talk? Does she come complete? My homeroom remains.
Ever hear a song that's so catchy, it feels like the whole world is humming it at once? That's what happened in 1981, when the Jay Giles Band unleashed Centerfold. It was cheeky, playful, and pure 80s fun. And boom, it shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Their album Freeze Frame went through the roof too, turning these guys, who'd been grinding since the 70s, into overnight sensations. Sounds like a dream, right? But here's the twist. Lightning didn't strike twice. Their follow-up fizzled, internal tensions grew toxic, and by 1985, the band was collapsing. Without another anthem to match Centerfold, their fame faded as quickly as it came. Funny thing though, people still sing along to the song at parties, yet most couldn't even tell you who sang it. Isn't that the cruel irony of rock and roll, when your hit outlives your name?
In a living room in a condo, Dasmo's on the rug with little Casio.
If there was ever a case of irony in music, it's Timbuk 3. Their debut single, The Future's So Bright I Gotta Wear Shades, 1986, exploded on the charts. Everyone thought it was a hopeful, upbeat anthem about success. But here's the kicker. It was actually a sarcastic song about nuclear war. Still, listeners missed the point, and it became their one and only hit. The band resisted being boxed into that optimistic image, but unfortunately, that meant their later work never gained traction. By the early 90s, they had slipped into obscurity. Today, they're remembered as the ultimate one-hit wonder, whose biggest success was built on a misunderstood song. You'd think winning an Oscar for a soundtrack hit would launch a band into long-lasting superstardom, right? That's what everyone thought when Berlin's Take My Breath Away stole the show in Top Gun, 1986. The song was massive, topping charts worldwide. But here's the problem. Berlin's follow-up album, Count 3 and Pray, didn't live up to the hype, and fans quickly lost interest. To make matters worse, internal tensions split the band in 1987, just a year after their biggest triumph. Today, Berlin is forever tied to one of the most iconic movie ballads of all time, but as a band, their career crashed right after takeoff. Shark Island prowled the late 80s hard rock scene with swagger and hooks that promised arena nights and leather-clad headlines. Richard Black's voice had both snarl and glossy charisma, and tracks like Paris Calling sounded built for radio thunder. Where the band stumbled was less about talent and more about timing and business, poor promotion, crowded label rosters, and an industry about to be flipped by grunge's stripped-back realism mowed down many acts built on spectacle. The band's live persona matched their recorded ambition, but the machinery behind them didn't deliver. For all the muscular riffs and cinematic choruses, they ended as proof that rock sometimes loses by calendar more than by craft. They had songs, but missed the moment.
Here's one that's about Watts, California. I don't know if you know Watts, but Watts is where we had the riots back in the 60s.
Ever stumble on a band that sounds like the soundtrack to a long drive through the desert at midnight? That was Green on Red. They came out of the Paisley underground scene in Los Angeles, but while others leaned into jangly psychedelia, Green on Red added grit, psychedelic haze mixed with country twang and a dash of Rolling Stones swagger. Critics loved it. Their 1985 EP No Free Lunch was hailed as smart, atmospheric, and promising. But here's the catch. Radio didn't care. No big singles, no easy hooks, nothing you could hum after one listen. Their music felt more like a mood than a hit, and that made them beloved by die-hard underground fans, but invisible to the masses. In a crowded 80s indie scene, Green on Red never found the breakout moment they needed. So the question lingers. Were they underrated geniuses, or just too niche to ever make it big? Lone Justice hit the scene in LA in the early 80s, riding high on the cowpunk wave with fierce, soulful vocals from Maria McKee and a gritty fusion of country, rockabilly, and punk. Their 1985 debut had critics buzzing, and they even opened for U2. But then the magic unraveled. As pressure mounted, the band pivoted toward a smoother, more mainstream roots rock sound, and in doing so, lost the raw energy that made them compelling. Their follow-up album, Shelter, released in 1986, barely made a dent on the charts, and internal tension grew. By late '86, Maria McKee disbanded the group, frustrated and feeling the band had turned into more of a vehicle than a collective. Think back to the 1980s. Neon lights, big hair, and one song blasting everywhere. Animotion's Obsession. It was irresistible. Slick synths, hypnotic beats, and a hook so sticky you could hear it once and hum it for days. For a brief moment, it looked like Animotion had cracked the code to pop immortality. But here's the twist. What happens when your biggest hit towers so high that nothing else measures up? That's exactly what happened. Behind the scenes, the band was less a well-oiled machine and more a revolving door of lineup changes and clashing ambitions. The glossy production stayed, sure, but the magic chemistry, that secret ingredient, slipped away. This band had that perfect alt-country rock blend, and their album State of Our Union did well, just not in their home country. Europe embraced them, but in the US, they remained buried in the college radio ghetto. In a controversial move, they did a TV commercial for Miller Beer, hoping exposure would help, but instead it blew up in their face. Fans accused them of selling out, and the backlash was swift. As one member put it, "The beer ad killed us in the USA. We went from hot to cold in about 3 weeks." Coupled with label indifference when their A&R guy was axed, and tours that lost money, the band couldn't sustain momentum and imploded by 1987. The Waitresses had charm, wit, and sharp pop-punk flair thanks to songwriter Chris Butler and the sardonic vocals of Patty Donahue. They gave us cult classics like I Know What Boys Like and the annual favorite Christmas Wrapping. Their debut album, Wasn't Tomorrow Wonderful, even reached number 41 on Billboard, but after that mini spark, the band sputtered. Their second album, Bruiseology, underwhelmed, and band members quit and returned, and they limped into a breakup in 1983. Essentially, they were too quirky to break out but too polished for indie cachet. Without a sustainable hook or unity, they faded fast. The Waitresses failed because their style was incisive and unique, but not easily packaged for long-term mainstream success. This band strutted out of LA as a high-glam, all-female metal band, earning them the moniker Female Bon Jovi. Their self-titled debut in 1988 delivered radio hits like Edge of a Broken Heart and Cryin'. So why didn't they last? Their sophomore album, Rev It Up, failed to hit hard, and internal clashes, lineup changes, and even a band name lawsuit followed. The band dissolved in 1992, fragmented by management chaos and market shifts in the early 90s. Glam metal was slipping, and Vixen didn't evolve fast enough. They failed because a strong debut couldn't compensate for internal turmoil, inconsistent follow-up, and genre fatigue. Formed around the articulate voice and songwriting instincts of Amy Mann, Till Tuesday arrived with an emotional clarity few new wave bands could match. Their music balanced bright, radio-ready production with lyrics that cut into modern relationships like a straight razor wrapped in silk. Commercial breakthrough proved elusive as internal debates over direction pulled members into smaller orbitals. Compromises weren't always creative wins. The band's spotlight sometimes felt like a mirror that amplified differences instead of convergence, and by 1989, those tensions hardened into practical separation. Flashback to the mid-'80s. MTV was booming, parties were loud, and along came the Hooters with their quirky mix of rock riffs and folk-inspired flourishes. With hits like "And We Danced" and "Day by Day," they had the kind of choruses you couldn't help but sing along to. Their sound was bright, upbeat, and perfect for summer nights and backyard radios. For a while, it felt like they were on the fast track to becoming household names. But here's the catch. While their songs were fun, they weren't exactly groundbreaking. When the 90s rolled in, audiences craved grittier rock and sleeker pop. Suddenly, the Hooters felt a little too safe, a little too tied to yesterday's vibe. Their later albums couldn't spark the same fire, and the spotlight shifted elsewhere. So, here's the question. What's tougher, breaking through or staying relevant? For the Hooters, the answer was clear. They danced into the charts but couldn't hold the floor.
I found a picture of you.
The Pretenders rode into the late 70s and early 80s on Chrissie Hynde's fierce songwriting and a taut, punk-tinged pop rock sound that felt both vulnerable and unapologetic. Critics loved their mix of melody and bite, and early hits made them one of rock's most compelling new acts. By the mid-80s, though, commercial momentum slipped. Lineup upheavals, personal tragedy, and changing industry tides made it hard to sustain the big spotlight. They kept recording, brave, song-first albums that showed stamina more than chart ambition. But radio and sales didn't always follow. Instead, the band became a touchstone for later alternative artists, influence over instant reward. Their chapter closes here, and just over the horizon lies a band whose oddball charm couldn't be corralled. Camper Van Beethoven cooked up a collage of sounds: jangly guitars, off-kilter ska, rootsy violin, and sarcastic literate lyrics, so eccentric it felt like a college radio mixtape made into a band. They popped in and out of mainstream view, buoyed by a cult hit that played like a secret handshake among indie fans. Labels sniffed potential. Internal tensions and genre hopping kept them from being corralled by radio programmers or pop executives. Rather than conform, they luxuriated in oddball arrangements and sly covers, earning devoted followers and the respect of fellow musicians. The DBs stitched British invasion melodies and southern jangle pop into songs that felt brainy, bittersweet, and quietly rebellious. Their early albums, Stands for Decibels and Repercussion, were cult favorites, full of off-kilter hooks and literate charm that made them college radio staples. But critical praise didn't translate into commercial traction. Fragmented label support and a sound too quirky for mainstream radio kept them on the fringes. Creative tensions led to lineup shifts, and by the time they released The Sound of Music, the spotlight had moved on. Still, their craftsmanship, clever lyrics, chiming guitars, and a melodic sensibility that prefigured alt-rock's rise earned them lasting respect. The DBs never cracked the charts, but they became a touchstone for indie artists who valued songcraft over stardom. Animal Logic was a studio-born curiosity that felt like a tasteful experiment. Stuart Copeland's sprightly, reggae-tinted drumming, Stanley Clarke's fluid bass poetry, and Deborah Holland's warm, expressive voice. The trio's music gleamed with professionalism and adventurous arrangements, alternating jazz touches with pop accessibility. But the project's very brilliance worked against it commercially. It sat between scenes, too refined for mainstream pop, too song-forward for the jazz market. Without a clear niche or relentless touring machine, their two albums circulated mainly among devoted listeners and music insiders who appreciated craft over chart position. The Bangles fused bright harmonies, chiming guitars, and irresistible pop instincts into songs that sounded like summer radio, immediately catchy, polished, and singable. Walk Like an Egyptian became a cultural moment. an earworm that turned heads and briefly made the band omnipresent. Yet blockbuster singles can be a double-edged sword. After such a dominant moment, the music industry and audiences sometimes expect a repeatable formula. Internal pressures, changing tastes, and the difficulty of translating novelty into long-term identity meant the Bangles found it hard to sustain that same commercial momentum. Still, their craft, tight vocal blends, strong hooks, and a knack for melding retro charm with modern sheen cemented them as icons of 80s pop rock.